Hey everyone, welcome back to Blurred Lines, Crime, Conspiracy, and the Truth Behind the Gossip. I'm your host, Ashley, or Ashtootrippy, as most of you guys may know me. I want to first and foremost thank everybody for sticking with me. I had some technical issues going on, so unfortunately, I wasn't able to record, but hopefully we have everything on track now and everything will be back to normal. But welcome back to Blurred Lines, guys. And today we're going to talk about a case that still breaks hearts in Texas. One that haunted an entire city for more than 30 years. I know a lot of you guys may have heard about it, and I know I have, and it's haunted me ever since I first heard about it. It's the story of 4 teenage girls, a small yogurt shop, and a crime so brutal it left a mark that time hasn't been able to fade. So this is the story of the yogurt shop murders, and this episode is titled Then and Now. This happened out in Austin, Texas, before it was known as the place to go for music and fun. I watched the documentaries in regards to this. The documentary over on HBO Max is actually one of them that is really good to kind of get a connection with not only the family members but also the victims in this story as well. So I would definitely recommend to go and check out that documentary. It does not have the ending to this because this case actually took over 30 years to solve. So that was actually released 2 months prior to this case actually being solved, not only through DNA matches, but also through ballistic casing. And they found out that the guy that actually did this, he is a serial killer. So we will get to that in a moment. But I know Blurred Lines isn't about sensationalizing this horror. It's about understanding the human side of tragedy and how it ripples through lives and communities, and what happens when justice gets tangled in confusion. This is one of those stories where the line between answers and uncertainty has been blurred for decades. So let me take you back to Austin, Texas in 1991. It was December 6th, 1991, a Friday night. Austin was still small compared to what it's become today. A friendly, music-filled city that felt safe. At a little frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, 4 teenage girls were closing up for the night. Eliza Thomas, who was 17, Jennifer Harbison, who was also 17, they were employees. Jennifer's younger sister, Sarah, who was 15, and their friend Amy Ayers, just 13, had stopped by to hang out and help clean up. They were talking about high school things, holiday plans, maybe boys, probably laughing at inside joke being teenagers. Even though this was a job to the girls, it didn't feel like that, as they had fun doing it and people remember them always laughing and smiling. The shop closed around midnight. When a fire truck pulled up hours later, flames were pouring out of the building. Once firefighters got inside, what they found stopped them cold. The fire had been set intentionally to cover something horrific. All 4 girls were found in the back of the store. They'd been bound with their own clothing, gagged, and shot in the head. It's one of those details you almost wish you didn't know. Not because it's graphic, but because of what it says about the fear they must have felt. Investigators could tell the killer or killers had tried to destroy evidence by burning the shop, but traces remained. Bullet casings, a melted receipt roll, fragments of rope, a faint scent of accelerant. Austin woke up that morning to headlines that didn't seem real. Parents hugged their kids a little tighter. People left flowers outside the blackened storefront of I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. This wasn't the kind of violence the city knew. And when something like that happens in a place that feels safe, it shakes the ground under everyone. Within days, the Austin Police Department had a task force and dozens of detectives, state agents, and tech labs. Tips poured in. Over time, investigators interviewed more than 50 potential suspects. There were theories, a robbery gone wrong, a jealous ex-boyfriend, a ritual killing, even whispers about drug deals, but nothing was ever really concrete. Eventually, attention focused on 4 teenage boys: Maurice Pierce, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Wilburn. They were young and hung around the mall near the yogurt shop, and one of them had been caught with a .22 caliber pistol, the same caliber used in the murders. They were caught at that mall that was just 2 miles away from the yogurt shop. Police leaned hard. After hours of questioning, Scott and Springsteen confessed. Well, sort of. Their stories didn't match perfectly, but prosecutors said that was just nerves. In 2001 and 2002, both were convicted of capital murder. For a while, people believed the nightmare had ended. But here's where those blurred lines start to show. The confessions were later ruled coerced. There was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, linking any of them to the crime scene. By 2009, both convictions were overturned. The state had no case left. For the families of Eliza, Jennifer, Sarah, and Amy, it felt like the nightmare was starting all over again. Because can you imagine it? You think that the killer of your daughter, of your sister, of your friend is caught, and you don't have to worry about this anymore. And then to find out that these weren't the correct people to take into custody that did this horrendous murder and started this fire in this community? Heartbreaking. When the convictions were thrown out, Austin was stunned. Families who'd sat through years of court dates and testimony suddenly had nothing but uncertainty again. The case went cold, officially open, but with no viable suspects and no clear path forward. Imagine being a parent in this situation, like I stated. You've buried your daughter, watched 2 men go to prison, and finally let yourself believe justice was served, only to be told, we're back to square one. For years, that was their reality. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries passed, all reminders of a loss that never got closure. Police said they'd keep working on the case, but leads ended up drying up. Evidence had been compromised by the fire and the early handling. Technology in the 90s couldn't pull much from what little remained. So you have to remember this place was set on fire, and in order to protect the businesses next to it, the fire department did have to put out the fire. And unfortunately, when the authorities walked into I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, they were actually standing in puddles of water. So you can imagine what was able to be found, they were lucky they found. By the mid-2010s, new DNA techniques were emerging. Touch DNA, familiar tracing, YSTR analysis. But for a long time, the yogurt shop evidence just didn't yield results. A partial male profile was found, but it didn't match any of the 4 men once charged or anyone in the national database. For the families, it was like watching justice fade in slow motion. But they never stopped pushing. Jennifer and Sarah Herbison's father, Frank, kept in touch with several detectives over the years. Eliza's family attended every public service update, even when there was nothing new to hear. Amy Ayres' relatives, especially her sister, spoke often about how she was just 13, the youngest, and how she deserved more than silence. And when you guys go and watch any kind of documentaries or shows or anything covering this case, you will hear from the family members that have fought since day one for these girls and for justice, for not only the girls that this affected, but also the family members, the ones that are no longer here to see the justice get served in any way. Then came renewed attention. In 2024, HBO announced a 4-part docuseries, The Yogurt Shop Murders. It aired the following year and reopened a lot of old wounds, but it also reignited public interest. So as I stated, it did air earlier this year. I believe it was in August is when it came out on HBO Max. The series didn't claim to solve the case. What it did was give space to the families, the investigators, and even journalists who'd followed the case for decades. It showed how deeply the case had affected Austin, not just the families, but the whole community that had been forced to live with the idea that something this awful could happen here and remain unsolved. You can still see the empty lot where the yogurt shop once stood. For years, people left candles and flowers there. The building was torn down, but memory has a way of staying behind. The docuseries also revisited the failures, the rush to judgment, the coerced interrogations, the blind spots that came when investigators want closure more than certainty. And that's the theme that fits Blurred Lines perfectly, right? How is this search for justice? We can sometimes cross into dangerous territory, pressuring confessions, ignoring evidence, mistaking resolution for truth. I mean, we're all human. We all want closure. We all want others to be able to grieve, be able to lay things to rest and move on with their lives. But then, just as the documentary's final episode aired, something unexpected happened. So again, like I said, this docuseries was released in August. And right when they released that final episode, there was something amazing that happened that changed not only the lives of people that have grown up and lived in Austin, Texas since the 90s, but specifically to the family members and the family members that aren't even here with us. There was a breakthrough. In late September of 2025, Austin police called a press conference. After 34 years, they said they had identified a suspect, and the name they gave was Robert Eugene Brashers. Brashers wasn't alive. He isn't alive. He died by suicide in 1999 during a police standoff in Missouri. But he wasn't just anyone. He was a known serial offender linked by DNA to rapes and murders across the South and Midwest during the 80s and 90s. Detectives explained that a combination of advanced DNA testing and ballistic evidence had connected him to the yogurt shop scene. A bullet casing recovered from the drain at the shop matched the same type of weapon Brashers used in his final standoff. And a Y chromosome DNA profile taken from preserved evidence pointed squarely to him. It was the kind of break that felt impossible for so long. Forensic technology had finally caught up to a 1991 crime. Families of the victims were briefed before the public announcement. Some of them said they felt relief. Others said it was more complicated. After all these years, the man responsible would never face trial. There'd be no cross-examination, no verdict, and no chance to hear him say why. Because that coward took his own life in a standoff with cops back in 1999. So he was free for 8 years after he did this horrendous crime and continued to do horrendous crimes. Now, I want to also add to this that in my searching for a lot of interviews that were done, when this was said, I guess some journalists got this information from inside sources and actually broke it before all of the family was notified. Because if you guys know about true crime cases, which if you're here, I'm sure you do, you know that breaking this kind of news to the family first is always the most important thing to investigators. And if you are somebody or if you are in the true crime space, always remember that there's a point of grieving that goes through when you first hear about what, especially unsolved, when you first hear about the person that took your sister's life, your daughter's life, your friend's life. So just remember that. But for the first time, they had a name that made sense. A man with a violent past known for targeting young women, operating in the region during that time. It didn't answer every question, but it filled a void that had been opened for decades. Now, there's something haunting about justice that arrives too late to hold anyone accountable. It forces you to rethink what closure even means. Even closure isn't the same as peace. Maybe it's just the ability to finally stop asking who and start asking why. For Austin, the yogurt shop murders were a loss of innocence. The city that prided itself on being weird and welcoming learned that even the safest place can hide unimaginable darkness. For the families, it was a lifetime of grief measured in a press conference and anniversaries. But there's also resilience here. Forensic scientists who never gave up, detectives who kept a box of evidence on their desks long after retirement, and families who spoke their daughters' names out loud so the world wouldn't forget. Now, I want to before I give any kind of, reflection on any of this, I kind of want to go over the victims' families in this case. They really did pressure the authorities to continue and open up that case file, that cold case file, to not let it get lost in the shuffle of everything. And also to the detectives on this case, I think that their perseverance really helped bring closure to the family and to the city of Austin. So when the Austin police announced Robert Eugene Brashers as the likely perpetrator, the city exhaled. Not in celebration, but in something closer to a quiet disbelief. 34 years of dead ends, false confessions, and fading hope, and suddenly a name most people had never even heard of. Brashers was a drifter, moving from state to state, working odd jobs, often under aliases. His known crimes were brutal. He'd been connected to assaults and murders in Missouri, Tennessee, and South Carolina. In each case, the pattern was eerily similar. Young women attacked with calculated cruelty and evidence burned or destroyed afterward. Doesn't that sound familiar to you? When you look back, it's hard to not wonder if he was hiding in plain sight. If he passed through Austin unnoticed on the December night in 1991. Just another stranger stopping for gas or food before vanishing into the highway. And because the science back then couldn't trace him, he disappeared from the story for 3 decades. That's the part that chills me. The idea that this person responsible might have been mentioned in an earlier lead list or crossed paths with an investigator, but the tools weren't there yet. Sometimes justice isn't denied. It's just delayed until the right light shines on the evidence. And I hope people realize that sometimes technology, especially for cases that were back in the 90s, and this also encourages every single cold case unit to start looking into this, because our technology we have now is solving 34-year-old crimes. When detectives revealed that modern YSTR's testing, the kind that traces male DNA down paternal lines, had tied Brashers to the evidence, the reaction was mixed. Relief, anger, disbelief, and exhaustion all at once. Because this case wasn't just about solving a mystery, it was about righting decades of wrongs. Families were misled, innocent young men were accused, and the city carried guilt for not knowing the truth sooner. And when truth finally arrived, it did so quietly. No courtroom drama, no final confession, just data, science, and the echo of 4 names that should have had so many more years. Amy Ayres, Eliza Thompson, Sarah Herbison, and Jennifer Herbison. Those are the names that matter the most. Not the killers, not anybody that has made documentaries or movies or books about these girls, but those girls, their lives, their laughter inside a little yogurt shop on a cold December night. When I think about this case, I keep coming back to what blurred line stands for: the space between certainty and confusion, truth and perception. This case lived in that space for so long. It showed how deception for answers can blur good intentions, how confessions can be shaped, how memory can fade, and how justice can get lost in the noise. But it also showed what persistence looks like. Detectives who refuse to close the file, refuse to take it off their desk. Families who refused to let the world forget and continued saying these girls' names. And science that kept evolving, one test at a time, until the evidence can finally speak for itself. Even though the man responsible can't face a courtroom, this feels like a moment of truth. Not closure, but clarity. And sometimes that's all we get. So tonight, if you're listening to this in your car, at home, or doing your daily chores, take a second to remember those girls. Because cases like this aren't just about horror. They're about humanity. And when we look at them closer, we see not only how fragile life can be, but how fiercely people will fight to protect memory in the pursuit of justice. This story had me, I went down the rabbit hole of everything, and there's so much with this story. I want you guys to know that I could not include every single thing in this podcast, and I really wish I could. There was a lot of things about the girls. There was a lot of things about that night. There was a lot of memories from the family and things that the family pushed for in this time that I can't even put into words of how resilient they are to do so. So if you guys have never heard about this case, I highly, highly recommend you go and watch the HBO Max series. There is also a 48 hours episode that's extremely good to know the kids, to know these girls. These girls, they were worked with the FCC, the Future Farmers, it's FFC, sorry, Future Farmers of America or something like that. And they were just really lovely girls. They didn't seem like they were too much. They didn't seem like they were troublemakers in any way. They worked a job that felt like it wasn't a job to them. And they liked being around each other. They had friends. They had crushes. They had dreams. They had goals. Just like all of us do. I want to thank you guys for listening to Blurred Lines. Be sure to comment and rate this wherever you're listening to this. We will be back every Friday with a brand new episode. But this has been Blurred Lines. My name is Ashley, or Ashtootrippy. And as always, thank you for being here with me, for listening, and for never looking away from the stories that still need to be told. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep your eyes open for the truth, even when it's hiding in the blur. Bye, guys.